Today, we're diving deep into the powerful and honestly often overlooked connection between the food on your plate, the trillions of tiny microbes living in your gut, and your body's entire inflammatory response. Let's get right into it.
Okay, so let's kick things off with a quote that sounds super dramatic, but is actually spot on. Death begins in the colon. Now, this was said over 100 years ago, and what's absolutely wild is that modern science is just now catching up and proving how right this guy was. It's really the key to understanding everything we're about to talk about.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start by uncovering a silent problem that might be lurking in our bodies. Then, we'll look to a really ancient solution for some answers. We'll take a journey deep inside our gut's ecosystem, check out what the latest science has to say, do a quick reality check, and then finally, we'll figure out how all of this applies to our future.
You know, so many of the health issues we face today don't just show up overnight. They creep in. They start as these small, nagging problems that we tend to just brush off. A little bit of gas, some heartburn, you know the drill. But underneath the surface, these can be the first rumblings of a quiet but pretty vicious cycle. And this is exactly what that cycle looks like. It all kicks off with the burdens of modern life. You know, stress, certain foods we eat, environmental toxins. That leads to those first symptoms we often ignore. But here's the really critical part. Our body's internal communication system starts to break down. And when that happens, chronic inflammation can take over, which is at the root of so many serious conditions that doctors often end up calling incurable.
So the big question is, how in the world do we break out of this cycle? Well, the answer might not be some futuristic new pill, but something incredibly old, an ancient dietary practice that science is just now beginning to fully appreciate.
We're talking about foods with some serious history, things like tangy sauerkraut, spicy kimchi, and creamy kefir. But these aren't just foods. They are literally alive. They've been transformed by this process of controlled microbial growth, turning them into absolute powerhouses of beneficial bacteria that can completely change our health from the inside out.
Okay. So to really get why these foods are so incredibly powerful, we need to go on a little journey, deep inside our own bodies, into the complex world of the gut ecosystem. So try to think of your gut not just as a digestive tube, but as a sprawling, bustling, microscopic city. This gut microbiome is so much more important than we ever thought. I mean, get this, it's home to up to 70% of your entire immune system. Just let that sink in for a second. The vast majority of your body's defense force lives right there.
Probiotics are basically the good guys that we can bring into this city. They're the live, beneficial bacteria that you find in fermented foods, and their job is to help keep everything in a healthy balance and to help fight off the bad guys.
Now this is where it gets really, really cool. So what happens when these good guys get to eat? When we feed them the fiber they love, they get to work and they produce something amazing. These incredibly powerful compounds called short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs for short. And these are the real magic bullets. And among all these SCFAs, there's one that stands out as a true hero molecule, butyrate. It does two absolutely critical things. First, it's the main source of fuel for the cells that make up your gut wall, which keeps that barrier strong and healthy. And second, it actively fights back against inflammation, basically telling your body's inflammatory response to just calm down. This all sounds great in theory, right? But what does the science actually have to say about it? Well, let's take a look at the evidence, because some of the recent studies have uncovered some, frankly, stunning findings. So check this out. A landmark study from Stanford back in 2021 decided to put fermented foods to the ultimate test. They set up a head-to-head competition between a diet rich in fermented foods and a diet rich in high-fiber foods.
And the results? Wow. They were not what a lot of people expected. If you look at this chart, that first bar shows a massive boost in gut diversity for the fermented food group. Now look at the second bar, the fiber group. It stayed pretty much the same. And that third bar, a huge drop in inflammation for the fermented food folks. The big surprise wasn't just that fermented foods worked, but that the high-fiber diet, which we all think of as a gut health champion, didn't have the same immediate, powerful effect. And we're not just talking a small drop either. The people on the fermented food diet had lower levels of 19, that's 19, different inflammatory proteins. And that includes a big one called interleukin-6, which is linked to some nasty stuff like rheumatoid arthritis and type 2 diabetes.
And it's not just that one study. Here's another piece of the puzzle. This is from a study that was looking at C-reactive protein, or CRP, which is another major red flag for inflammation in the body. And you can see right here, in Group A, the women who ate fermented vegetables, their CRP levels went down. It's another clear signal that these foods are actively cooling down inflammation.
Okay,
So at this point, this all sounds pretty amazing, right? But as with pretty much everything related to our health, it's not always quite that simple. We need to do a little reality check before you go out and buy a gallon of kimchi.
This brings up a super common and totally valid question. If these foods are so good for me, why do I feel kind of bloated and uncomfortable when I eat them? The answer is actually fascinating, and it goes right back to the state of your gut. Here's the deal. Fermented foods are naturally high in compounds called histamines. Now, in a healthy, happy, balanced gut, like the one on the left, your microbiome can break these down no problem. But if your gut is already out of whack, a state scientists call dysbiotic, it just might not have the right crew in place to do the job, and that leads to a reaction. So the key takeaway is this. It's not that the food is bad, it's that the environment it's going into just isn't ready for it yet.
So, what's the game plan? How do you get started safely? The trick is to go low and slow. Start with a tiny amount, and I mean really small, like a single teaspoon. Miso paste can be a really gentle way to start, and this last one is absolutely non-negotiable. You have to choose raw, unpasteurized products. Heating kills all those good bacteria you're trying to introduce in the first place.
So when you pull it all together, the big picture is this profound and direct connection between what's on your plate, the world inside your gut, and your health for years to come. And listen, this isn't some fringe idea. You've got leading experts like Dr. Tim Spector who confirm it. Eating fermented foods can literally remodel our gut for the better. They strengthen that crucial gut barrier, which is our first line of defense against the very inflammation that starts that whole disease cycle.
So yeah, the science is becoming crystal clear. By simply adding these ancient foods back into our modern diets, we can take a really powerful, proactive step towards boosting our immunity and protecting ourselves from chronic inflammation.
And this really just leaves us with one final thought. If your gut is an ecosystem, a garden, then every single meal is an opportunity. You're the gardener. The only question left is, what are you choosing to grow?